tweeted this one out and it got a lot of responses. It was basically a question that said, what are the strongest types of moats and what are the weakest types of moats? I thought it was a perfect one for you, John, as you're joining the show today, as you like to study this type of stuff. A lot of people said that brands were pretty weak, although there were some people that had some, pushback on that, saying stuff like the luxury companies, Coca-Cola, can be extremely strong. A lot of people did not like economies of scale and capital intensity because um, it's almost like who has the bigger gun. And it seemed like most people, and I'm curious whether you guys agree or disagree with this, most people thought network effects, regulatory capture, and why am I forgetting the other one? Switching costs were the premier moats out there. Obviously, each case is different. Costco has really strong economies of scale and a brand, and that seems to work well for them. And that moat is quite wide. But what do you guys think? What is your maybe favorite or the best type of moat, and what's the weakest one that you don't like as much?
Ryan, you want to
John,
go?
you want to go first,
Oh,
or
me? Okay,
Ryan?
yeah. I think it's case dependent. I think the short answer is um, the company that has the most overlapping and reinforcing moats. So not just one moat, but multiple reinforcing moats, and combine that with a management team that invests constantly to fortify and possibly widen those moats. So I think it's a case dependent basis, but I think in general, it's the companies that have multiple sources of reinforcing overlapping moats and a management team committed to protecting, fortifying, and even widening those moats. I agree with you that um, there are moats and then there are moats. ASML has a 100% earned monopoly because they have a 15 to 20-year head start on extreme ultraviolet lithography. The only three competitors that tried to compete with them were Canon, Nikon, and Intel, and they all gave up. Literally, one of the main reasons, maybe 70% of the reason that Intel has fallen so far behind is because they tried to do EUV, extreme ultraviolet lithography, on their own in-house without just buying ASML machines. Um, the machines are 300 to 400 million dollars. They take two Airbuses and multiple uh, Airbus planes and multiple buses and container ships to transport the components just for one machine. They rely on hundreds, possibly thousands of suppliers to make one machine and are therefore the linchpin of the global semiconductor industry, along with Taiwan Semiconductor. Um, those moats are almost impossible to replicate in a 10-year period. Almost impossible. There are moats and then there are moats. Um, you know, a company that has, so, those would be at the top of my list. They're almost impossible to replicate. A company that has multiple reinforcing moats, there are so many of them, but look at a Visa. It has a globally recognized and trusted brand, number one. It has global scale and it has network effects. Um, and when you have these multiple overlapping moats like that, and they're protected by management, that is what drives um, long duration profitable growth. Long duration. I'm not talking about a company that can grow 100% a year for a couple of years. I'm talking about a company that can grow 10 to 15% a year for decades. And so, you know, you mentioned brands being weak. I think that's the case sometimes if brands don't know how to adapt to a digital sort of influencer world. Um, Now people can go online and price compare instantaneously. A lot of the advertising is done on YouTube or Instagram or wherever, on Facebook. And so, some brands are weaker in that environment if they can't adapt their go-to-market and their marketing campaign in that environment. Other
I like
times, yeah.
I said I like the idea of reinforcing moats with the brand. I kind of think one of the
Brand and network effect is hard to beat.
yeah, I was
Like
gonna
Visa, it's
say
hard to beat.
yeah, an example of that would be someone like American Express, where it has the network effect plus the long-standing brand. You have Apple, kind of with the switching in costs, maybe a little bit of a network effect too, along with a
Absolutely.
strong brand. I think that's where what I like. I like that idea of reinforcing when you have two or three working together.
Yes.
That can be quite attractive as a business, especially because I think if you look at some of the apparel companies, you could say their brands are strong, but a lot of the stuff has been ephemeral over the long term. And it's hard for me to identify in that industry something besides the brand that brings you a competitive advantage. And that's where I get a little bit nervous about durability. We have some follow ups with you on ASML.